My name is Simone Beaumont. I am 31 years old, and 2 years ago I stood in the back kitchen of a rented banquet hall on Demon Broyen Street in Nashville, Tennessee, wearing an apron that didn't belong to me, rinsing canapé trays at 11:30 at night because the actual catering staff had started breaking down the bar and there was still food to deal with, and nobody else was going to do it. 15 hours. That's how long I'd been there. 15 hours of setting up and serving and refilling and cleaning for 35 guests at my brother Marcus's 35th birthday party. An event that had taken 6 weeks of my weekends and hundreds of dollars of my own money to execute. An event at which my own mother introduced me to her book club friend as the young lady who's been helping us get things together. Not as her daughter, not as Simone. As the young lady who'd been helping. I drove home to my apartment on Wedgwood Avenue at 12:15 in the morning, and I sat in my car in the parking garage for 22 minutes. Not thinking, just sitting. The kind of sitting you do when your body has finally run out of the energy required to keep performing okayness. The parking garage was quiet except for the hum of the ventilation system and the tick of my cooling engine, and I sat there in the dark in my jeans and my cooking-smeared top, and I looked at the concrete pillar in front of my car, and I thought about the apron. About the woman named Susan Mercer, who had pressed a wine glass into my hand and asked me to bring her a Chardonnay. About my mother standing 4 feet away when it happened, watching, and saying nothing. And then I opened my phone, and I found a 5:50 a.m. American Airlines flight from Nashville International to Los Angeles, connecting onward to Honolulu, $714 one way, and I pressed confirm with the emergency credit card I'd kept at a zero balance for 3 years, the one I'd been saving for something I hadn't yet been able to name. That was the something. I went upstairs. I packed a carry-on. I left a note on the kitchen counter for my boyfriend, Terrence, who was asleep in the bedroom and who I'd already been leaving in slower, quieter ways for months. I ordered an Uber at 2:15 in the morning. And by the time the sun came up over the Cumberland River, I was already at the gate. This is what it took to get me there. This is the whole story, and I'm going to tell you all of it. Before we get into it, please like and subscribe, but only if this story truly resonates with you. Drop your location and the local time right now in the comments. I am serious when I say I read every single one. I want to know where you are tonight. What city are you in? What time is it where you're sitting? Tell me. I grew up in a brick 2-story house on Timberdale Lane in Antioch, Tennessee, a suburb about 14 miles southeast of downtown Nashville. The kind of neighborhood where everybody mows their lawns on Saturday mornings and waves at each other from driveways, but doesn't necessarily know each other's middle names. The kind of neighborhood with a Kroger and a nail salon and a Dollar General at every major intersection, where the houses all have the same 3 or 4 floor plans and you know which is which by the shutters people chose, the only real expression of individuality the subdivision allowed. My father, Gerald Beaumont, Jerry, everyone called him, worked 29 years as a letter carrier and then a postal supervisor for USPS out of the Processing and Distribution Center off Elm Hill Pike. He retired at 58 with a federal pension, a plaque the department gave him at a small party I was not invited to. I found out about it 2 weeks after the fact, and a left knee that had been aching since approximately 2007 from decades of walking routes in all weather. He spent his retirement years watching Tennessee Titans games in a La-Z-Boy he'd had since 1999, tending a vegetable garden in the backyard that produced more zucchini than 4 people could reasonably eat, and navigating the domestic geography of a house that had always been, in every meaningful way, my mother's territory. My mother, Diane Beaumont, was the office manager at a chiropractic practice called Brentwood Spine and Wellness on Franklin Road, a position she'd held for 16 years. She is organized, meticulous, efficient, and deeply invested in the way things look to other people. Her house is always company ready, which in practice means it's always slightly too tidy to feel comfortable. The kind of house where you feel guilty setting a cup down without a coaster, where the decorative pillows are arranged with a precision that communicates, clearly, that they are not for using. She sends thank you cards within 48 hours of receiving any gift. She remembers every social slight anyone has ever committed against her and will reference it, lightly, years later, as though reading from an internal log she maintains for exactly that purpose. My brother Marcus Beaumont is 4 years older than me. He is everything my mother wanted in a child, and she has never, not once in 31 years, not in a single conversation, not in any moment I was present for, tried to hide that fact. Marcus was the kind of kid who got away with things not because he was sneaky, but because he was charming in that effortless, room-filling way that makes adults say things like, "What a personality," before they've even heard what he's actually done. He played basketball at Antioch High School, never well enough to attract a recruiter, but well enough that my father once drove 4 hours to Knoxville for an away game and left me home with a neighbor named Mrs. Tillman who smelled like mentholatum and had a cat that hissed at me every time I moved. I was 11. I had a science fair project due the following Monday, a model of the water cycle I'd been building for 3 weeks out of construction paper, a plastic tub, and a desk lamp. And I'd been hoping my father would help me finish the display board that weekend. He forgot. He got home at midnight, let himself in quietly, and the next morning told me the team had lost by 14 points, like I'd been asking. I didn't cry about the science fair project. I finished the display board myself, the night before it was due, at the kitchen table at 10 o'clock, with a glue stick and a ruler. I got a B+. My teacher, Ms. Farrell, wrote on the assessment form, "Excellent independent effort." That phrase, "excellent independent effort," became, without anyone planning it, the summary of my childhood. My mother kept a bulletin board in the upstairs hallway, right outside the bathroom, covered in navy blue felt she'd tacked up herself sometime in the early 90s. That board was a living archive of Marcus, his 8th grade Student of the Month certificate, which stayed pinned there until I was almost in high school. A newspaper clipping from the Tennessean about the Antioch High School basketball team's spring season, in which Marcus's name appeared in the 4th paragraph. His community college certificate from Volunteer State, where he took courses in business administration over 2 years without ever finishing a degree. A photo of him at his first pharmaceutical sales job, grinning in the company polo, leaning against the hood of the car my parents had bought him. That board was updated with sincere, specific care every time something happened to Marcus's life. It was consulted, pointed at, shown to guests. My college diploma. I graduated from Middle Tennessee State University in Murfreesboro with a degree in accounting, magna cum laude, after 4 years of working 22 hours a week at a coffee shop on Broad Street to cover what my partial merit scholarship didn't, was picked up from the framer by my mother and then lived in the trunk of her Toyota Camry for 11 days before it ended up on the wall of my childhood bedroom. I know it was 11 days because I counted. I didn't say anything about the counting. I passed all 4 parts of the CPA exam on my first attempt, a thing that approximately 49% of candidates manage. My mother said, "That's wonderful, honey," and then asked me if I could figure out why her Epson printer wasn't communicating with the laptop, which turned out to be a paper jam in the secondary tray. Marcus closed a big quarterly sales deal at his pharmaceutical company, MedSource Partners, and my parents took him to dinner at the Palm restaurant on 2nd Avenue to celebrate. Because, my mother said, he'd been working so hard. I had been working hard at that point for 7 years. I audited the financial statements of corporations with revenues in the tens of millions of dollars. I once found a $217,000 accounting error in a client's receivables ledger that saved them from an IRS audit they would not have survived. My mother did not take me to the Palm for that. She didn't know about it for 3 months, and when I finally mentioned it at Thanksgiving, she said, "Oh, that sounds stressful," and passed the green beans to Marcus. Now, I want to be fair to my father here, because this story gets complicated by him in ways I didn't fully understand until I was much older. Gerald Beaumont is not a villain. He is a man who learned to follow my mother's lead on all family matters, because 32 years of marriage had taught him it was simply easier, and that habit had become something so automatic that I don't think he experienced it as a choice anymore. He was not cold to me. He put a hand on my shoulder sometimes, Sunday mornings, when I was doing homework at the kitchen table, and said, quietly, so my mother couldn't hear from the other room where the television was on, "You're going to do something real, Simone. I see it." He said it like a secret being shared, as though the only way he could give me what he couldn't give me in front of everyone else was to press it into the space between us, where nobody was watching. I have thought about those moments a great deal. I've wondered whether they were kindness or cowardice, or both. The way so many things we do for the people we love are both at the same time. My grandmother on my father's side, Ruth Beaumont, a retired elementary school teacher from Gallatin, who drove a beige 1994 Buick LeSabre until she was 73, read 3 novels a month, and made the best sweet potato pie I have ever tasted, was the one person in that family who never once made me feel like a runner-up. Granny Ruth came to every school thing I participated in. She sat in the front row of my 6th grade spelling bee. She drove 45 minutes to Murfreesboro 3 separate times during my college years, just to take me to dinner at the Cracker Barrel off I-24, and sit across from me, and ask what I was reading, what I was thinking about, what I wanted. Not what Marcus was doing, not what my mother needed, what I wanted. She was the only person in my family who asked me that question on a regular basis, and I understand now, as an adult, how rare and necessary that is. Someone who treats your inner life as though it matters, and isn't contingent on how it reflects on them. Granny Ruth passed away from congestive heart failure at Sumner Regional Medical Center in Gallatin when I was 26. I held her hand for 6 of the final 8 hours. Marcus was at a sales conference in Phoenix and couldn't get a return flight in time. My parents were in and out of the room, checking on her, and then retreating to the waiting area, the way some people have to manage hospitals. They need the corridor, the vending machines, the ordinary hum of a building that isn't just grief. I stayed. I sat in the chair beside her bed with the blinds half open and the heart monitor marking time, and at one point she opened her eyes and looked at me with a clarity that surprised me, given how medicated she was, and she said, "You've always been the one who stays." I told her that wasn't such a special thing. She said, "Yes, it is." And then she closed her eyes, and 6 hours later, the monitor changed its sound, and the nurse named Terica came in gentle and thorough, and brought me a cup of tea, and let me sit with her for a while, before she had to prepare the room. I drove back to Nashville alone in the dark, south on I-65, the highway empty at that hour, and I felt the grief settle into me the way it does. Not all at once, but gradually, finding every available corner. I didn't know then that Granny Ruth had done something quiet, something she'd arranged with an attorney in Gallatin 18 months before she died, something I wouldn't find out about for 5 more years. Now I need to tell you about the party, because everything I've told you so far is context. The party is where it ends. In September of 2023, my mother called me on a Tuesday morning. I was at my desk at Kraft & Aldridge Accounting on Union Street in downtown Nashville, reviewing a quarterly earnings report for a commercial real estate client, and told me the family was throwing Marcus a 35th birthday party. Not a backyard gathering. A real event. She'd already looked at venues. She was planning on the Birchwood Hall, a rented banquet space in the Gulch neighborhood, capacity for 60, full kitchen available for caterers, parking validated, 35 guests for Marcus's 35th birthday. My mother had thought of the matching numbers herself, and was pleased with the poetry of it. "I'm going to need your help pulling this together," she said. Not, "Would you like to be involved?" Not, "I'd love your help if you're available." "I'm going to need your help." Present tense, declarative. As if the decision had already been processed and filed, and my role in it had already been assigned. "Mom, I have a really heavy quarter coming up at work." "Simone, it's your brother's 35th. This is a milestone." My own 31st birthday, 6 months earlier, had been a dinner at Applebee's on Nolensville Pike. my parents, Marcus, and my boyfriend Terrence, who spent most of dinner responding to work texts under the table. We were done by 8:30. My mother gave me a Bath & Body Works gift set in the eucalyptus spearmint scent, which I don't particularly like but have never said so, and a card that read, "Happy Birthday, Sweetheart," in her handwriting with no other note inside. My father gave me a Target gift card for $20, which I used to buy dish soap, a new shower curtain liner, and a box of dryer sheets. Marcus got there late and left before dessert. Nobody made a toast. I told my mother I would help with the party. I said it before I'd even thought about it, because 31 years of that particular training doesn't wait for conscious consideration. It just answers. The party was 6 weeks away. Let me tell you exactly what happened in those 6 weeks, because this is the part I need you to understand. Not in summary, not as a general impression of unfairness, but specifically, the way I understand it. Week 1. My mother asked me to do the venue walkthrough with the Birchwood Hall's event coordinator because she had a scheduling conflict that turned out to be her standing nail appointment at a salon in Brentwood she's been going to for 11 years and has never rescheduled in any circumstances. I took 2 hours of personal time off work. The walkthrough lasted 90 minutes. I made every decision that needed making: table configuration, linen colors, ceiling lighting rental, parking arrangement for the validated structure down the block, the layout of the gift table, the positioning of the DJ booth. I documented everything in a detailed summary email and sent it to my mother at 9 o'clock that evening. She forwarded it to Marcus's fiancée, Kendra Walsh, with the note, "Simone handled the logistics. See below." 3 words and a redirect. Not, "Thank you." Not, "Great work." See below. Week 2. I was asked to pick up the custom birthday cake from Sweet Provisions, a bakery on 12th Avenue South, because it was in my neighborhood, which it was not. It was a 6-minute drive from my office, not my apartment. The cake was 4 tiers, buttercream frosting in navy and gold, with an edible photo portrait on the top tier of Marcus at his company's annual award dinner, an image my mother had selected from a set of options I had not been consulted on. It cost $420. My mother texted me the following day to ask if I'd kept the receipt. She did not reimburse the $420 for 11 days, and when she did, it came as a Venmo transfer labeled Cake CHX, with no acknowledgement of how long she'd taken. Week 3. I drove to 3 different Party City locations, looking for a specific shade of navy blue balloons my mother had seen in a Pinterest inspiration photo. The first store in Madison didn't have them. The second store on Gallatin Pike didn't have them either. The third store in Smyrna, 26 miles from my apartment, had them. 40 miles of driving across Davidson and Rutherford counties on a Saturday, I had originally planned to spend finishing a continuing education module I was behind on for my CPA license renewal. Weeks 4 and 5. I designed the custom photo banner on an online print service, proofing it twice because the first proof had a font size issue and the second proof had a color saturation problem. I coordinated with the catering company, Magnolia Table Catering, a local Nashville operation, on the menu, the dietary restriction list, the serving timeline, and the staffing for the event. I managed the RSVP responses through a shared Gmail account my mother had set up, and then forgotten the password to within 4 days. I arranged the floral order: 3 dozen white roses, 6 arrangements in mercury glass vases, through a shop called Flower and Stem on Charlotte Avenue. I spent an entire Sunday afternoon at my parents' house in Antioch, helping my mother address invitations by hand, because handwritten is more personal, and then I stuffed, stamped, and mailed 35 envelopes to 35 guests, all of whom were Marcus's colleagues from MedSource Partners, my parents' friends from Crossroads Baptist Church on Bell Road, and Kendra's extended family from Chattanooga and Knoxville. Marcus, during the 6 weeks of planning, contributed the following: the original suggestion of the party, made to my mother over Bluetooth in his car on the drive back from a sales call in Memphis. Kendra, during the 6 weeks of planning, contributed the following: a Spotify playlist link she texted to my mother, which my mother then forwarded to me, to forward to the DJ. I want to ask you something directly, and I hope you'll answer in the comments, because I genuinely want to know, have you ever been told you're good at the thing your family expects you to do endlessly for free? The planning, the logistics, the organizing, the emotional management of every moving part, while someone else in the family is celebrated just for breathing in the direction of the event? Tell me what that role is in your family. Tell me what they called it, because I don't think you and I are alone in this. The day of the party was a Saturday in mid-October. I arrived at the Birchwood Hall at 8 in the morning. The event started at 6 in the evening. I was there for 10 hours before a single guest arrived, and 5 more hours after the last one left. My mother arrived at 10, carrying a tote bag full of items that needed placing. Framed photos of Marcus arranged chronologically from childhood to present, a custom Happy 35th yard sign for the entry, and a tin of homemade oatmeal raisin cookies she'd baked the night before. Because Marcus loved oatmeal raisin cookies, and she'd been making them for his birthday since he was 7 years old. She carried the tote bag to a table and then set it down and began telling me where things should go, which is a different activity from helping put them there. My father arrived at 11 with 8 folding chairs borrowed from the Crossroads Baptist Fellowship Hall because the Birchwood Hall's inventory had come up 4 chairs short, and rather than pay the $16 rental fee for 4 additional chairs, my parents had borrowed them from the church. The church chairs were a slightly different shade of brown than the venue chairs. I spent 45 minutes rearranging the seating configurations to minimize the visual discrepancy. Nobody noticed except me. Marcus and Kendra arrived at 5:30, 30 minutes before the first guest was expected, both of them relaxed and polished, both of them carrying nothing. They'd spent the morning, I later learned from a photo Kendra posted to Instagram, at a spa in Green Hills getting couples massages and a late brunch at a restaurant in Hillsborough Village. Marcus kissed my mother on the cheek, clapped my father on the shoulder, looked around the room, at the flowers I'd arranged, the banner I'd ordered and proofed twice, the 35 place settings I'd laid, the photo display I'd built from images I'd collected from my mother's phone, and said, "Damn, Mom, this looks incredible." Not Simone. "This looks incredible, Mom." My mother beamed. I was wearing a black wrap dress I'd bought on sale at a Nordstrom rack on Harding Pike specifically for this event, my one concession to the fact that I was technically a guest at my own brother's party. By 4 in the afternoon, I'd been recruited into the kitchen to help the Magnolia Table catering staff plate the hot appetizers because their prep cook had called out sick, and the catering manager, a harried young woman named Jordan, had approached me because I was the one she'd been coordinating with for 6 weeks, and I was the only non-caterer who knew where everything was. My mother had looked at the situation and said, "Simone, you don't mind, right? You've always been so handy in the kitchen." I took the dress off in the single-stall restroom near the kitchen entrance and changed into the jeans and blouse I'd fortunately packed in the overnight bag in my car, a habit from years of being asked to do unplanned physical things at family events. I tied on one of the spare catering aprons, hanging on a hook near the kitchen door, white, half-length, embroidered with the Magnolia Table Catering logo in green thread. I want you to sit with that image. The woman who booked the venue, designed the banner, picked up the $420 cake, drove to 3 Party City locations, arranged the flowers, managed the catering coordinator for 6 weeks, set up 35 place settings and 8 mismatched chairs, standing at a stainless steel prep counter in a catering apron, spooning Boursin cheese onto crostini, while her brother stood in the main hall with a drink in his hand and his face on the top tier of the cake I'd personally transported from 12th Avenue South. Guests arrived at 6. The room filled the way rooms do when the event is going well. Slowly at first, and then all at once, the noise level rising, the bar line forming, the air warming with the presence of 35 people who were glad to be there, and glad for Marcus, and glad for the open bar, and the navy and gold decorations, and the food I'd spent 2 hours plating in the back. I came out of the kitchen between tasks to refill water pitchers, to help direct a guest to the accessible restroom, to handle a small issue with the speaker connection that Jordan asked me to troubleshoot because she'd never met the venue's AV setup before, and I had, during the walkthrough 6 weeks earlier. I moved through the room in the jeans and the apron, efficient and quiet, the way I'd been moving through my family's events my entire life. The moment happened at 8:30. The dinner plates had been cleared. The DJ had started the second playlist, something slow and background, and people were breaking into conversational clusters, the kind of post-dinner ease that settles over a room when everyone's had enough wine and the formalities are done. I was crossing the room near the kitchen doorway, carrying an empty serving tray, when a woman I didn't know put her hand on my arm to stop me. Her name, as I said, was Susan Mercer, one of Kendra's aunts from Chattanooga, I later learned, a woman in her late 50s with reading glasses on a beaded chain, not entirely unlike my grandmother's, which is a detail that still catches me when I think about it. She pressed her empty wine glass into my hand with the comfortable authority of a woman accustomed to being served at events, and said, "Honey, could you bring me a Chardonnay, and maybe a bread roll if there are any left in the kitchen?" I held the wine glass. I looked at Susan Mercer, who had already turned back to the person she was talking to, the request delivered and processed and filed in the category of things that get handled. My mother was standing 4 feet away. She was speaking to her friend Cassandra from the book club, and she was looking right at me, right at that specific exchange, at the wine glass being placed in my daughter's hand by a stranger who didn't know I existed as anything other than staff. She saw it. I know with absolute certainty that she saw it. And then she turned back to Cassandra and resumed her conversation. She said nothing. She let her friend's sister-in-law hand her daughter a wine glass like a waitress at an event I'd spent 6 weeks building, and she said nothing. I brought Susan Mercer her Chardonnay. I went to the bar, poured the wine, came back, placed it in her hand. She said, "Thank you, sweetie," without looking at me. I walked back to the kitchen, and I stood over the stainless steel prep sink, with the water running cold over my wrists, and I looked at my own hands, and I stayed there for a long time, just looking at them, thinking about what they'd done all day, all week, all month, all year, all the years, and what those hands had been called in that room tonight. Not Simone, not daughter, the young lady helping, staff, sweetie. If someone in your family ever had the chance to claim you out loud, in front of a room, in a moment where it would have cost them nothing and meant everything, and they chose not to, I want you to tell me about it in the comments. Not because I want you to relive pain, because I think being named is something every person deserves, and when it doesn't happen, it deserves to be said somewhere, even years later. I kept going. That's what the training does. It overrides the moment with motion, and you keep going because stopping feels more dangerous than continuing, even when continuing is the thing destroying you. I finished the night. I stayed through the cleanup, through the gift table being dismantled, through the slow farewell procession of 35 guests, hugging Marcus and telling him how wonderful the party was. I stacked chairs. I helped Jordan's team carry the catering equipment to the service elevator. I loaded the leftover food into containers I had bought and brought from my own kitchen, because nobody else had thought of that. At 11:15, the room nearly empty, my mother found me rolling the service cart back toward the kitchen. She looked satisfied and tired, in the way of someone who's successfully hosted an event without having done the work of it. She looked at me, at the apron, at whatever she could read in my face, which I'd been keeping professionally neutral for hours, and she said, "Simone, I really couldn't have done this without you. You're just so capable. So capable. Not, 'I'm proud of you.' Not, 'You are my daughter and I love you and you deserved a seat at this table tonight and I should have told Susan Mercer your name.' So capable. Like a well-reviewed appliance. I drove home. I sat in the parking garage for 22 minutes. I thought about the wine glass. I thought about the banner. I thought about my grandmother saying, 'You've always been the one who stays.' And I thought, maybe that's been the whole problem. I pressed confirm purchase. $714. one way to Honolulu. And then I went upstairs. And I packed. Hawaii did not feel like escape. I want to be clear about that, because in the stories people tell about leaving, there's always a version that sounds like freedom arriving fully assembled at the departure gate, and that is not what happened to me. What I felt standing in line at Nashville International at 4:30 in the morning was terror. Clean, cold, clarifying terror. The kind that tells you you've done the right thing, precisely because it frightens you this much. I landed at Daniel K. Inouye International Airport at 3:17 on a Sunday afternoon. I had a carry-on suitcase, my laptop, my CPA license, and approximately $2,800 in my checking account. I had no job, no housing, no plan beyond the connection through LAX that had delivered me here. I took a taxi to Kalihi, a working neighborhood west of downtown Honolulu, not the brochure Hawaii, but the real one, the one with roosters crowing at 4 in the morning, and laundromats and plate lunch spots and neighbors who know each other through the thin walls of small apartment buildings. I checked into an extended stay motel that cost $62 a night and had a hot plate and a mini fridge and a window that looked onto a parking lot, and I ate convenience store food and sat on the edge of the bed and asked myself, out loud, to the ceiling fan turning slowly overhead, "What are you doing?" I didn't have an answer for 4 days. On day 5, I started making calls. The CPA license I'd earned in Tennessee was transferable to Hawaii through a reciprocity application process, a $200 fee and several weeks of processing, but I could work while it was pending in a supervised capacity. I applied for the reciprocity on day 6. I updated my resume on day 7. I applied to every accounting firm in Honolulu with an open position on day 8. I was offered a staff accountant position at Nakashima and Ross, a mid-size firm on Bishop Street in downtown Honolulu, within 3 weeks. Starting salary, $68,000, which was $12,000 less than what I'd been making at Kraft and Aldridge in Nashville. I took it without negotiating, because I had $1,400 left and a motel room I couldn't afford much longer. And I've made peace with the fact that desperation is a real condition that real people operate under, and it doesn't reflect poorly on you, that you accepted what you needed to accept in the moment you needed to accept it. I found a studio apartment in the Nuuanu neighborhood, $1,450 a month, a second-floor walk-up with a narrow lanai that looked toward the Ko'olau Mountains, the range going green and gray at dusk in a way I had never seen mountains look before, with clouds that caught and held in the peaks like something that was trying to stay. I stood on that lanai the first evening with a glass of water, and I said out loud, to nobody, "Okay, this is yours." And I meant it. My name alone on the lease, my furniture chosen without committee, my space entirely. Terrence and I broke up by phone 6 weeks after I landed. He said I'd abandoned him. He said he'd been nothing but supportive, and I didn't argue with him about that, because he had been supportive in the way a weather forecast is supportive, consistent, accurate, and ultimately uninvolved in what actually happens. The call lasted 43 minutes. When it ended, I went out on the lanai and sat with the dark and felt something I hadn't expected to feel, which was quiet. Not empty. Quiet is different from empty. Quiet has something in it. At Nakashima and Ross, I met Marlene Kahananui, senior partner, head of tax compliance, 52 years old, half Hawaiian and half Portuguese, born and raised in Kalihi, which was the neighborhood I'd landed in. She wore reading glasses on a beaded chain that reminded me a little of Granny Ruth's, and she had a way of walking into a room that communicated, wordlessly, that she'd already thought of whatever you were about to suggest and was waiting patiently for you to catch up. She noticed I worked through lunch. She noticed I took on additional client files without being asked. She noticed I stayed on Fridays when the junior staff left. One afternoon she came into my office, sat down without asking if I had a minute, and said, "You work like someone who was never told they were good enough." I opened my mouth to say something professional. What came out was, "Yeah, that's about right." She took me to a plate lunch spot on Baratania Street the following Saturday, and over Kahlua pork and rice, with paper plates between us and locals eating lunch at every other table, I told her everything. The corkboard, the kitchen drawer, the apron, the wine glass. Susan Mercer, so capable. She listened the way people listen when they have no competing agenda. Not waiting for her turn, not framing the response, just receiving. When I finished, she set down her fork and said, "You don't work hard to prove something to them anymore. You work hard because it's who you are. But you need to figure out whether you're moving because you love where you're going, or because you're terrified of what happens if you stop." I turned that question over for months. I turned it over in the office, and on the bus, and on my lanai, watching the mountains, and in the early mornings before work, when Kalihi was loud with birds and traffic and ordinary life. The answer I arrived at, eventually, was both. I had been running from something, and I was also, genuinely, running towards something. The trouble was I hadn't yet learned to tell the difference between the two inside my own body, and learning that was the actual work of those 2 years. Not the career, not the apartment, not the salary, the internal work of understanding what I wanted versus what I was fleeing. 14 months after I was hired, Marlene recommended me for a promotion to senior associate. My salary went to $89,000. I took on my own client portfolio, small business owners, a Honolulu restaurant group restructuring its LLC agreements, a family-owned retail chain on Maui, working through a partnership dispute. I was good at it, and people said so, out loud, by my name, in rooms I was present for. That still sounds like a small thing when I describe it. It was not a small thing. I met James Freitas at a continuing education lecture on financial planning for healthcare professionals at the Honolulu Country Club, where Marlene had sent me to present a segment on tax-advantage savings accounts for medical practitioners. James was an ER attending physician at Straub Medical Center, 34 years old, originally from Providence, Rhode Island, in Hawaii because he'd done a fellowship at Queens Medical Center and then found he had no interest in leaving. He asked a good question during my section. The kind of question that shows someone has been genuinely listening, rather than waiting for a networking opportunity. Afterward, he found me near the coffee station and said, without preamble, "Hi James Freitas. You explained the HSA rollover rules in a way I've literally never been able to understand, and I'd like to buy you a coffee." I didn't fall in love quickly. I want to be honest about that. I had spent 2 years understanding what I wanted and what I didn't, and I approached the next thing with more deliberation than I'd applied to anything before in my life. But James was patient in the way that genuinely secure people are patient, not performing patience, not waiting for his turn, but actually untroubled by the pace of things, because he didn't need me to arrive anywhere on a schedule that worked for him. He let me be someone who needed to understand her own ground before she let someone else walk on it. I don't know a rarer thing than that. The reversal, the moment the whole story shifted, came on a Wednesday morning in my second year in Honolulu, and it came not from anything I did, or said, or forced, but from a letter forwarded through my Nashville post office box to my new address, from a law office in Gallatin, Tennessee, called Tillman and Graves. It sat unopened on my kitchen counter for 2 days. I assumed it was something administrative, a Tennessee tax notice, something about my old address, junk with a law firm's return label to make it seem important. I opened it on a Wednesday morning before work, standing in the kitchen in my pajamas, with coffee going cold beside me, and I read it standing up because I'd just meant to glance. My grandmother's house in Gallatin, the brick rancher on Hartsville Pike, where I'd learned to play spades and eaten cereal for dinner, and sat with her in the last hours of her life, had not simply passed into her estate. Granny Ruth had met with an attorney 18 months before she died and placed the house into a trust. The house was to be sold, the proceeds invested, and when I turned 30, the trust would disperse. The beneficiary she'd named for the full distribution was me, only me. The house had sold for $197,000. The trust had held and invested the proceeds for 30 months. The disbursement amount was $214,800. I read it 4 times standing at the counter. I called the law office and spoke to David Tillman, who confirmed everything, and I asked him if she'd left any documentation of her reasoning, and he paused and said there was a letter included with the paperwork that my grandmother had written herself. The letter was 3 paragraphs long. I'm not going to share it with you in full, because some things are mine to keep. But the last line said, "Simone, you stayed. Staying is worth more than people remember to say." I called my parents that night. My mother answered. I told her about the trust, and the letter, and the money, and I waited, genuinely waited, hoping for something. Pride, warmth, the recognition that this was significant. My mother was quiet for a full minute, and then she said, "Ruth never mentioned any of this to us. Not Simone. That's extraordinary. Not, your grandmother loved you so much. Ruth never mentioned this to us." As though Granny Ruth had been required to file a disclosure. And then my mother said, "I don't know how Marcus is going to take it. 2 years. 2 years since the parking garage, since the apron, since Susan Mercer's wine glass." And her first instinct was still, managing how Marcus would feel about something that had been left to me by my grandmother who I held while she died. "Mom," I said, "Marcus got $4,000 toward a car when we were teenagers, and I got a bus pass. I think he'll be okay." She didn't answer that. I said goodnight. I went and sat with James on the lanai, and I told him what happened, and he put his arm around me in the dark and said, "You don't have to do anything with that money that isn't entirely yours." And I thought, this is what it is to be someone's main character, not their labor, their main character. With the money I did the following, in this order. I paid off the remaining $28,000 on my MSU student loans I'd been carrying for 9 years because my parents didn't have resources for the second child. The same parents who'd had $4,000 for a Mustang 2 years before that. I made a down payment on a 2-bedroom condo in Manua, 2 blocks from the University of Hawaii campus, with a lanai big enough for a table, and 4 chairs, and a view that still makes me stop every morning. I donated $10,000 to First Graduate, a Nashville-based nonprofit that supports first-generation college students navigating higher education without family financial guidance, because I wanted the money to do the thing my grandmother had spent her whole career doing, see the person who was working hard and hand them something real. I established a $5,000 annual award through the organization, named the Ruth Beaumont Scholarship, for the student who demonstrates the most outstanding independent effort. The name the award uses is the same phrase Ms. Farrell wrote on my science fair assessment form when I was 11. I chose it deliberately. If someone in your life saw you when no one else was looking, a grandparent, a teacher, a mentor, a stranger, and they did something for you, quietly, without needing credit for it, I want you to write their name in the comments right now. Just their name. Because those people deserve to be named somewhere, even if they're not here to read it. Especially if they're not here to read it. Marcus called 4 days after my mother told him about the trust. He approached the conversation with the careful energy of someone who'd been briefed and had prepared remarks. "Hey," he said, "Mom told me about Granny Ruth's thing. That's really great. And then, I didn't know she'd done that. And then, after a pause long enough to have its own weather, it's just a lot of money." "It is," I said. I don't know. It's weird that she didn't include both of us, right? Like we were both her grandkids." I let the silence sit. I've become very good at letting silence sit. "Marcus," I said. "I held her hand when she died. You were in Phoenix. I don't think it's weird." He didn't call again for 2 months. When he did, he didn't mention the money, and neither did I. We talked about his daughter Hazel, who had just been born, about a Titans game my father had watched, about a restaurant in the Gulch getting good reviews. The most normal conversation we'd had in years, which tells you something both hopeful and sad about what normal looks like in some families. My father called 2 weeks after the money conversation, on a Sunday afternoon, alone, and I could hear the game muted in the background. He said, Simone, your grandmother was right about you. Just that, nothing else. He didn't explain what he meant and didn't need to. I said, "Thanks, Dad," and we talked for 40 minutes about his garden, and my condo, and a pothole on Timberdale Lane, and it was the best conversation we'd had in my adult life, measured by what was true in it. My mother and I went to therapy separately, and then together. Once, a joint session facilitated by a therapist named Dr. Valerie Crenshaw at a counseling practice on West End Avenue in Nashville, who specializes in family systems dynamics and who has the particular gift of saying the thing that's been left unsaid without making anyone feel accused. In that session, my mother said something I had waited 31 years to hear some version of. I think I expected Simone to be fine without attention, because she always seemed fine. I didn't understand that she seemed fine because I'd trained her to seem fine. Dr. Crenshaw let that land. I let it land. My mother cried, and I handed her a tissue, which was its own small irony, and I meant it. I did mean it. It's not fixed. I want you to know that, because I think you deserve the true version rather than the clean one. My mother still sometimes says things that land wrong. A comment at Christmas about how Marcus and Kendra's daughter Hazel is such a natural performer, delivered with the particular glow I recognized from the corkboard that never had my name on it, and I have to excuse myself to the kitchen for a few minutes. Old patterns don't retire. They just occur less frequently and become easier to name, which is what progress actually looks like, according to Dr. Crenshaw, and I am choosing to believe her because the alternative is expecting more from a person than she has yet become. Marcus and I exist in the careful middle distance that some siblings occupy. Not estranged, not close, talking about surface things in the language of family maintenance. I flew home to Nashville when Hazel was 3 months old and held her in the living room of Marcus and Kendra's house in Brentwood, and she looked up at me with the ancient, expressionless gravity newborns have, and I said quietly, just to her, "I'll always be glad you exist." I meant it without condition. Whatever Marcus and I will never manage to be to each other, his daughter is a person, entirely her own, and I refuse to let the inherited weight of our family history decide how I show up for her. I live in the Manoa condo. James and I were married last spring, a small ceremony on a beach in Lanakai. 30 people, every single one of them someone I had actively chosen and who had actively chosen me in return. My father walked me across the sand. My mother sat in the second row and cried from the ceremony processional all the way through the vows, and I let her cry, and I didn't move to manage it or minimize it. I just let her feel what she felt. That, too, is a thing I've had to learn. I was promoted to senior tax manager at Nakashima and Ross in January of this year. Marlene made partner last fall, and her first recommendation was me. For her former role, I lead a team of 6. My name is on the door placard outside my office. Not in a kitchen drawer, not on the back side of a corkboard that's full of someone else. On the door, where people walking by can read it. I think about the parking garage sometimes, the 22 minutes, the hum of the ventilation system, the cold light of the concrete pillar in front of my car. I think about what I was in that moment, not someone heroic, not someone who had it figured out. Someone who had finally bent past the point of being able to spring back, which is not a dramatic thing, it's a physical thing, a thing that happens to materials under sufficient sustained load. I sat in that parking garage not because I was brave, but because I was done. And it turned out that being done was the beginning of everything that actually mattered. I don't know what your parking garage is. Maybe you're in it right now, sitting in the dark with your phone in your hand, reading the address of somewhere far enough to start over. Maybe you left yours long ago, and you're watching this from the other side, from the lanai, from the condo with your name on the deed, from the office with your name on the door. Maybe you're somewhere in between, which is where most of us are most of the time, neither fully in the old life nor fully free of it, navigating the distance between who you were trained to be and who you actually are. What I know is this: capable is not a compliment when it's all they give you. Capable is what you call someone whose value you've decided to use without acknowledging it. You are not a resource. You are not the help. You are not the young lady who's been getting things together. You are a person who deserves to be named, out loud, in every room you've ever built. If you see yourself anywhere in this story, the apron, the wine glass, the parking garage at midnight, I want to know. Tell me in the comments what you would have done, sitting there with your phone in your hand and a flight 6 hours away. And if you want more stories like this one, everything you need is in the description below.